Out on Thursday?
Probably.
I was not here.
Let's see if I have 1, 2.
I don't know.
Sarah.
The
The last.
eyebrow one. Yeah.
Okay. I think I just gave away my last copy of that, so thank you. Having 2 eyebrows is dominant over having 1. 6 fingers is dominant over 5. What is the probability of each phenotype of a man that has 1 eyebrow? So what must he be for eyebrows? Little, right?
Yeah.
And he has 12 fingers, but he's heterozygous.
Big F Flora.
Marries a woman who is heterozygous for both. What will she look like?
Big F Flora.
Okay. Make sense to everybody so far?
Yeah.
All right, what can we get from Dad?
2.
What can we get from Mom? 4. Right, we can get all of them from Mom. Okay. So we're going to get big E, little e, big F, big E, little e, big F, little f, little e, big F, little e, big F, little f. Big E, little e, big F, little f. Big E, little f, little f. Little e, big F, little f. Little e, little f, little f. Okay. And we need to figure out what is the probability of each phenotype. Okay. What's this phenotype?
1 eyebrow.
That's actually 2 eyebrows.
2 eyebrows.
And
12
fingers, right?
Uh-huh.
So I have 1, 2, 3 of them.
Yeah.
Okay. What does, and let's cross them out, right? 1, 2, 3. What does this guy look like?
2 eyebrows and 5.
Well, probably 10. He didn't lose a hand. 10 fingers. And we have how many of him?
1.
We have 1, right? What's this guy look like?
1 eyebrow and 12.
1 eyebrow and 12 fingers. We have 1, 2, 3 of them, right?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, and 1 eyebrow, 10 fingers. Okay. So what's the probability of this guy? 3 out of what?
Out of 8.
This guy?
1 out of 8.
This guy?
3 out of 8.
This
1
guy.
out of 8.
Okay. Make sense to everybody?
I think my letters should start.
Right. So you do need to be careful. How you draw these things are confusing. E is a good letter. F, you gotta be careful how you draw it. I see. Anything else give us trouble we want to go over?
I don't remember. I don't think so.
Okay. So let's take a look at the next part of our notes, the next part of this chapter. Meiosis. What does meiosis sure sound a whole lot like? Mitosis. Now what was mitosis?
Movement of water through
That's osmosis.
I thought it was when it fell 2 cells.
Okay, mitosis is making 2 copies of a cell, right?
Yeah.
Mitosis is making 2 copies of a cell. Now, meiosis is going to be similar but a little bit different. In order to understand that, though, we'll need to first talk about chromosomes. Now, we've already had one definition of chromosome. We're going to talk a little bit more about it in this chapter. What's our old definition of chromosome?
Wound up.
Wound up chromatin, wound up DNA, right? And that, of course, is true. Chromosomes are wound up chromatin. Of course, chromatin is just DNA. So chromosomes are really dense, really mobile things of DNA. In fact, if you took one of your long chromosomes, say 1 or 2, if your chromosomes are numbered, those are 1's the longest chromosome, 2's the next longest, 3's the next longest, and you can probably guess it goes on like that till 22, and then you get a really weird one with 23. We'll talk about that later. But these are going to be the links for chromosomes. If you could unspool all the DNA of your first chromosome, you could get, thank you, Francie.
you could get a number of different. What?
It has me in the video, and I don't
Scoot
want
over.
to see it.
Not me either. That's better.
You see,
So we have these chromosomes. If you pull them all out, you get I don't think a couple hundred yards of DNA from a single chromosome once it's pulled all the way out. However, they're very compact. And what the chromosome is actually going to be is going to be the actual physical unit of inheritance, right? It's not the semantic, it's not the meaning, but it's the actual object that gets inherited. That is the chromosome itself. So it is a unique, it is a discrete unit, that little X right there, that each one of your cells has when it's all wound up together, is the physical, unique unit of inheritance, okay? You have a chromosome point, a place for chromosomes called point number 1, place number 1. How many chromosomes do you have there?
1.
You had one parent?
I have 2 parents.
So you got one chromosome 1 from mom and
1 chromosome
1 from dad. How many chromosomes do you have at spot 10? 1 from? No. Just a place, right? Just a place. You have 1 from mom and 1 from dad. You even have 2 chromosomes at spot 23, the weird one. We'll talk about why it's weird in a little bit. But you're going to have 1 chromosome because that's actually what you inherited. You got 1 chromosome 1 from dad, 1 chromosome 2 from dad, 1 chromosome 3 from dad, all the way to 23. What'd you get from mom?
1
Same thing.
chromosome.
How many total chromosomes do you have?
23.
Well, you got 23 from dad.
46.
46, okay? You got 46, okay? So the chromosomes are the actual inherited unit. And here's something fun. Where did dad get his chromosome 1 that he gave you?
His dad.
His mom or his dad, where'd they get theirs?
Their parents.
Their mom and their dad, where'd they get theirs?
Their parents.
Well, it doesn't.
Back to Abraham.
Well, not necessarily. You're probably thinking of Noah, right? Noah. You're not Jewish, right?
No.
So you're not Abraham's descendant.
So we all are related.
Yeah,
In
That's
some
what
way.
he breaks in the same name.
that's right.
So wait, when did incest stop being a problem though? Like at
Well,
what point?
I mean, in Alabama, never.
I know, but at what point does incest not affect you? Because if we're all technically related.
The increased risk of incest is actually way smaller than people tend to think it is. It actually doesn't show up very often at all, even in first cousin intermarriage. In fact, in the Middle East, there's a law in some countries that you have to marry a first cousin. And so, for instance, in Iraq, it's shameful if you don't have a first cousin to marry.
I don't like my
So you have to go to like second or third cousins. Well, you're going to get the worst of those cousins because they're the ones who are left. All the more attractive, wealthier siblings got snatched up by other cousins. So it's actually not that bad. In fact, I run a farm wherein we force a high degree of incest on our animals because they have traits we want, right? There's a reason cows are delicious and stupid. It's because they took the stupidest, most muscular cows, which would come from the same family, and forced them in their breed. So they got dumber and dumber, but tastier and tastier. Well, it's not real hard. You just
don't
keep
let
them
them
together.
together.
They're animals.
But
then it's not really forcing them, it's just,
Well,
it happens.
you rather prevent them from interbreeding with others, right? So that's how you select who they breed with. You don't let them around others. Okay. As far as the laws of incest, they start pretty anciently, but usually it's brother-sister, right? Cousin marriage being considered incest doesn't even show up until the 20th century. In fact, it was considered pretty usual to marry a cousin. And if you read Jane Austen, right?
She read that book.
She did write some books. That's why I said you read her. They marry cousins. In fact, it's considered.
But
to be
she
the
wrote
proper
Kill a
thing.
Mockingbird.
Nope, that's hard to read. It's completely different.
What did Jane Austen write?
Pride and Prejudice.
I read that book. Dang it, that was terrible.
Yeah, but
It's such a good book.
Mansfield Park, Northanger Abbey, and Persuasion.
Did you like Pride and Prejudice?
It's such a good book, how did you not?
I read Private
Like
Punishment.
But now I read high school.
It wasn't what I expected though. I expected like a To Kill a Mockingbird with prejudice against
They have
like a
no-
race.
Why? They have nothing to do with it.
I know, but when I hear Pride and Prejudice, I think like a book where there's like rivalries, and then I hear prejudice, like racial prejudice is the first thing that comes to my mind, and it wasn't.
Yeah,
prejudice against poor people.
Great. Also, it has nothing to do with either one of those. Okay, so we have these chromosomes, and they're the actual units of inheritance. In fact, we can define species to a certain extent, not too much, I don't want to oversell this point, by the chromosome number. What's the chromosome number in humans?
46.
46. Interestingly enough, chromosome number in sheep, 48.
Oh, that's
Chromosome number in chimpanzees, also 48.
So
Now, one other interesting fact, we feel like the more chromosomes you have, the cooler you are, right? And so we want to say that, well, a rabbit has, and I don't really remember, I think a rabbit may have 21. We feel like, well, we're twice as cool as rabbits, so we have 46. But chromosome number is actually not important at all. Bananas have 1,700 chromosomes. The reason they have 1,700 chromosomes is because we've been messing with them ever since we found them as a society. And we have forced them to get more and more and more chromosomes because chromosomes contain genes. And an original banana would have, let's say, 1 gene for sugar on 1 chromosome. How can we make sweeter and sweeter bananas?
give it more chromosomes.
We make sure they have more and more chromosomes with that. In fact, I think right now bananas and some other fruits have something like maybe 100,000 genes for sugar, which makes them delicious, right? The kinds of, they're coming out with new apples every year. There's a Honey Crisp apple out right now that's finally coming over to the East Coast, to our side of the country. And it's like almost, they're new apples. They invented them about 5 years ago.
That's so weird. They invented some
But
apples.
they're seasonal.
Yeah, most fruit is. So we have,
Oh, you're making fun of me too much today.
it's too easy. So we have these bananas with an incredible number of chromosomes. So the number of chromosomes actually is not important. It's what they actually code for that matters. If you have 1 billion genes, but 999,000 are for sugars, you can't be very complex. That makes sense to everybody? Okay. It turns out, though, that different cells, but we're talking about eukaryotic cells now. Chromosomes are not found in bacteria. They actually have loops of bacteria, little wads of bacteria. In eukaryotic cells, non-bacteria, we're going to have different types of cells that will actually have a different chromosome number, okay? The first type of cell, we've mentioned this before, if you remember, a diploid cell. How many copies of each chromosome does diploid have?
2.
2 copies, right? Di means 2.
Wait, 2
Almost every cell in your body, is diploid.
Plus 2.
2 copies of each chromosome, right? So, for chromosome 12, you have 1 copy from and 1 copy from. That's 2 copies, right? That's why you're half mom and half dad. That's how sexual reproduction works, right?
Yeah.
So, you have these chromosomes, and the chromosome number of the diploid cell is going to be 2 of each chromosome. And the way we write this is, if you remember, 2n, right? N is the number of different chromosomes. 2n means you have 2 of each chromosome, okay? 2 of each chromosome. You have 2, number 1, chromosomes number 2, blah, 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 blah. And then we get to chromosome number 23, where if you are female, you have 2 of the same chromosome. And what do we call that chromosome?
X.
X. So this is girl, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are 2 chromosomes. But what do boys have?
Y.
They have an X, and then they have this thing, which is called Y.
Wait, so
Right.
I only have 1 Y chromosome? In my
In
entire
each
being?
cell.
Oh, in each cell.
In
Gotcha.
each cell,
Gotcha.
you have 1 Y chromosome, okay? So, once again, 1 from mom, 1 from dad, that's right. Which is why the male gamete decides the gender of the offspring in mammals. In birds, it's actually the opposite, the female decides. But in mammals, it's whether or not you get the male chromosome, which is this little useless piece of. You can write whatever you want, or not write whatever you want. But this is what it would look like. We call it Y. That's just what it looks like. And the Y is almost useless. It does 2 things. It makes you a boy, and it has the gene that may or may not give you ear hair when you get old. Only 2 things it does. Other than that, there's nothing on the Y. It doesn't do anything.
Wait, making you a boy is pretty important.
Well, it is to some of us.
Well, it is for continuing a
Right, so
population.
that's tremendously important. But the X has probably, I think, 5,000 genes. The Y has 2. See the difference? Now, what is at least socially the most important gene is
X.
found on it, right? It's certainly not for living, right? There's way more important genes, like the gene that produces the enzyme that does respiration, way more important than the gender gene right here. But socially, and obviously, in fact, this is the one, so I can actually look at you and tell which chromosome you have right here, right? So that's a pretty amazing chromosome. It's that important. There's really only other one type you can actually look at someone and tell, and that's 21, which causes Down syndrome.
Can someone have two wives?
They can. Actually, I believe we're going to talk about that at the end of this chapter. They call them, don't overread anything into this. They're called super males. They don't have powers. They don't have powers. Okay, they're actually infertile. We'll talk a lot about that. Okay?
I don't see this super male.
Right, but did you see XYY, don't you?
Yeah, XYY syndrome.
We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that. They don't have superpowers. They don't have superpowers.
I'm going to ask you
Okay,
about that.
all right.
Okay, I don't know this, but Miss Garner, when we had some classes.
Right, she had a little extra segment on chromosome 14, which is a little bit different. If Catherine had 3 chromosome 14s, that would have been lethal. This is just a small segment of chromosome 14, and we'll talk about how that happens probably tomorrow. Then there was just some developmental issues. Okay. But yeah, I only know that because she told me.
I just told us, I just couldn't remember.
Yeah, it's 14. 21 is so after this right here, the next least important chromosome is chromosome 21, and so you can actually survive with 3 of them. If you have 3 of anything else other than this one and 21, it's lethal. The embryo doesn't even form.
Is there no way of manipulating chromosomes?
There are ways.
Why can't we prevent Down syndrome or like reverse it or whatever?
Well, okay, so this is so if you are a boy, every cell has a Y.
Yeah.
So in order to change every cell, you'd have to destroy every cell.
And they died.
That's true. That's true. You're right.
So how do you manipulate them?
Well, that's the easiest way to manipulate them, or you can break them apart. But so once fertilization happens, the genes are set.
Yeah.
That's what you have, right?
Yeah.
There may be some way to get certain genes not to turn on. And we know how to turn on some genes in like houseflies. It's actually, you can actually put these genes in a fly. It's actually kind of cool. It's a light-sensitive gene, and so they can make these clones of houseflies, fruit flies, Drosophila melanogaster is the fancy name for them. And if you expose when they're eggs, if you expose some of them to this, I think it's UV light, they will actually grow. They'll develop a different color than the ones who don't have UV light. So you can actually switch those genes on and off by messing with light. But that's just for very simple pigmentation genes in fruit flies, which is the animal we can best control. That's how they discovered how DNA worked, really, was messing with these houseflies. Fruit flies, I should say.
Is it true that like every 7 years you have a new?
Well, okay, so it doesn't work quite like that. So this is how it really does work. So there's not a single piece of you right now that was in you 7 years ago.
Okay, so with that,
What about your eyeballs?
So they're made out of different carbons, different oxygens, different waters. That's all different. They're the same shit. They may be a little larger, right? But there's not a single piece of you that's the same as you were 7 years ago.
couldn't you like take something or have some sort of treatment that would slowly kill off the Down syndrome?
Okay, so if you have Down syndrome, every cell in your body has 3 21 chromosomes. And because of that excess of protein, the body developed differently than it would have. It had too much of the proteins, and so it developed different. It is not something hanging off the cell, or it's not a piece of DNA. It's a developmental problem. In other words, the body developed in that format. Okay? So a developmental issue cannot be cured, right? It's how it happens as the individual. It's how their brain formed. It's how their body formed, right? That is, it's basic to the process. Development is an expression of genes, but you can't reverse a development. Does that make sense? And when it comes to the fact that nothing in you is the same piece, that doesn't mean DNA. Your DNA is still the same. It just now has a different oxygen atom in it than it did before. It has a different carbon. That's what's changed, okay? And while it's true that none of your cells other than your nerve cells and maybe a couple of cardiac muscular cells live longer than about 2 years, they're going to be instantly replaced. In fact, your skin doesn't last longer than maybe a month. Your red blood cells don't last more than a week, 2 weeks tops. but they're immediately replaced by another one that's the exact same thing. Well, if there is a gap, that's disease, right? If there's a gap in the replacement, you now have a disease. Or disorder, at the very least.
If you lock somebody in a room for a month, and would there be like a big pile of
Well, so here's
skin cells?
If we call it dust.
Yeah, I know, but like there's not that enough to make a human.
Right. So if you kept them there for 7 years, right, you would have to send in enough food to keep them alive for 7 years. So every time you eat, you're getting new pieces, right? Every time you cough, every time you breathe out, every time you pee, every time you poop, you're releasing old pieces, right? So you are constantly bringing in new pieces and releasing old pieces. And over about 7 years, and they figured this out by slightly radio tagging some chemicals and taking measurements on the replacement rate. Over 7 years, there's not a piece of you there that stays around that long before it gets replaced.
Okay, so there would be a pile of human cells.
Well, so if you gathered, in fact, it'd be bigger, way bigger. If you gathered all the waste you produced over 7 years, it would probably be enough for a lot of people.
I'm just talking about the skin.
Well, so so if you gathered all the dead skin, it would be equal to the amount of new skin you've grown in that time, pretty much. Does that make sense? But then the other pieces get released in other ways. Does that make sense? So let's say you spent a year collecting all your poop, right? And you took it and tried to shape it into a human-sized thing. That poop man would be larger than you. And then you try to run all your urine through his veins, right? That would be a lot. You asked about it. You could shut up this poop man with urine in his veins. I'm just trying to explain poop man urine veins to you. Okay. So, or she could fill a swimming pool with your urine. Thank you, Mike. Well, I want you to think about this. What do fish do? They pee in the ocean. So the ocean is really a giant toilet. And you know where all your poop and your pee go?
Into the ocean.
Into the ocean.
I hate the ocean. I hate fish too. We can take them in the ocean and I'd be okay with it. Or the rodents in the
Every
sea.
time you go, you might as well just dump your head in the toilet and swirl it around.
Oh my
It's
God.
about as clean as the ocean.
That's almost as disturbing as the part
All
of
the
the
runoff of the rocks and things come down and release ions in the salt water. And it builds up, so it has nowhere to go. It stays there. So the water leaves, right? But when it evaporates, it leaves all the ions behind, so it stays salty. And then some of the salt gets picked up.
How come pee is good for jellyfish sting?
Well, I wouldn't say it's good for it.
How come it makes it stop singing?
Well, it's better to get tenderizer, meat tenderizer.
Meat tenderizer?
Yep.
Is that what pee is? Meat pee a meat tenderizer?
And yeah, so next time you're making steak, just get a nice marinade going.
I mean, if I peed on it, it would just burn off in the flames.
I tell you what, that's your assignment. That's your class project.
Pee on a steak and then cook it?
On a piece and then eat it.
Yours fairly sterile, so if you had to
Too waterous.
eat one of the things you exude from your body,
Why do people?
that's probably
It would be, it's mostly water.
Why are you nodding like that? Yeah, I do that every day.
Why do people put pee on babies?
Someone should probably talk to your mother.
That's what happened.
What?
Not me, but like babies with acne. What?
Once again, someone's going to have to talk. Remind me to never hire you as a babysitter.
Not yet.
Okay, so we have these chromosome numbers, and while the average cell is diploid, right? The average cell is diploid. We're also going to have haploid cell. Now, if diploid meant 2 of each chromosome, what will haploid?
4.
It means 1 of each. Haploid means half. So if this is diploid, haploid will be an N, okay? But we don't normally need haploid cells. In fact, they can do less. They have less DNA, they have less genes, they can make fewer proteins. So, when would you need a haploid cell? So, well, no, actually, if it's asexual, we want more diploid cells. How do you make a diploid cell from 2 individuals?
What if he's self-pollinated?
Same thing. So but if you combine two diploids together, you get something with 4 times, right? 4 copies.
Yeah.
The haploids are going to be our sex cells. So they are going to join together to make a nuke. So if we take 2 haploids and put them together, what do we get? A diploid. So this is the way we reproduce sexually, through haploid cells. These are called gametes. Everybody remember that term, gametes?
Yes.
Haploids are gamete cells, right? They are reproductive cells, or in complex organisms they are. We'll look at some exceptions to that. This word gam right here, anybody know what that word root means, gam? So
Like
if you
gamma
are
ray.
a polygamist, what does that mean?
Many
wives, or many actually spouses. You can be a female polygamist.
You can?
So, which part of that word means many? Poly. So what will mean marriage?
Spouse or scam.
Gam. In fact, if you are a bigamist, how many
2.
spouses? 2. And a monogamist? 1. Okay, so gametes are literally the joining cells, or the marrying cells. They're the cells that join together. And because they join together, they need half the chromosomes. They need half the DNA. So while most of your cells, almost every cell in your body is diploid, with 46 chromosomes, the gametes in your body are going to have how many?
1.
Let's try this again. So the diploid has 46.
23.
23. Sarah?
Is this only animals or is plants the same?
So this is true of pretty much everything other than bacteria, and a couple of plant and fungi exceptions we'll worry about later. So complex organisms, eukaryotes, this is true of almost every eukaryote.
For the diploid, you know, which one is the haploids? There's only one?
Well, so here's the thing. If, let's say you have blue eyes, right? Now, let's say you got a blue-eyed chromosome from dad, right? Well, if your dad has brown eyes, he may have 1 blue-eyed chromosome and 1 brown-eyed chromosome, right? If you get his blue-eyed chromosome from his dad, you could have blue eyes. If you get the brown-eyed chromosome from, let's say, his mom, you'd have brown eyes. So it's random as to which grandparent's chromosome you get, right? Which is why you may have blue eyes, but a sibling may have brown eyes. You may have gotten grandpa's blue eye gene. Your sibling may have gotten grandma's brown eye gene, right? Because you don't know which one of the chromosomes from dad you're going to get. They actually shuffle. Remember back when we talked about the law of independent assortment? The chromosomes shuffle up, and you don't know what each sperm and each egg are going to get.
What happens if you have 2?
Well, there's not just a simple blue-brown-eyed inheritance. It's really complex. There's lots of things that can go on with that. Well, cats actually have more colored genes, but cats have also been bred, and so they have a kind of crazy gene combination because we carefully bred them. Well, not as much as dogs, right? But cats can have different colored eyes. There's a lot of different factors that can do that. There's even calico syndrome, where some genes activate in some areas and others don't in other areas. So you don't get one coat color, you get a speckled coat color.
Is that
In cats it is. It's called a chimera effect. It happens with various other syndromes as well. Certain areas have different chemical concentrations, so sometimes the gene will turn on. At the very simplest, it's not exactly like freckles, but it's not too far off from freckles either. Freckles have some genes turned on that other spots don't. It's a little bit different than that, but it's kind of a similar idea. Okay, so the haploid, those are going to be our reproductive, our gamete cells, okay? Now, what's the male gamete going to be called?
Sperm.
Sperm. And what's the female?
Egg.
Egg, right? We'll get to that in just a second. But before we do, we need to talk about how the haploid ends up with just 1 pair of chromosomes. All haploid cells come from diploid cells. Yeah. And we'll talk about how it works. We'll talk about how we produce haploid cells. Haploid cells will come from diploid cells, but they will get 1 of each pair of what we call homologous chromosomes. Homologous chromosomes are chromosomes with the same genes on them, or rather genes for the same traits on them. So if we say, let's say we have, in humans, you get a chromosome from mom that has hair color and height and ability to roll your tongue, right? That same chromosome for dad will have the same genes on it, the same genes for traits on it. That makes it a homologous chromosome, okay, it makes a homologous chromosome. They have genes with the same traits on them.
Was the ability to roll your tongue seriously genetic?
It actually is. It's one of the closest simple genetics that humans have.
So when I got made fun of for not being able to roll my tongue, they were making fun of my genes?
Well, if you got made fun of because you look stupid, you got made fun of because of your genes, right? You got made fun of because of the way you act, your genes don't do that, right? So your genes dictate which proteins form, which dictates your structure, attitude, and mind. So yeah, if you get made fun of, you're made fun of for your genes.
Is that codes for protein?
Unless it's what you're wearing.
Is that what it means?
In which case, that's not your.
So
Well,
you
the
can't
proteins are
roll your
also
tongue?
physically what you
Like
are.
that?
Can't
You
do
can't do
that.
that.
Yeah, salmon cheese.
I can do like a Tostito
It's,
scoop type
talking about
tongue.
chromosome, let's say we're talking about chromosome 14, right? And it goes for stomach acids, right? So you get a gene that has dad
Can't do it.
right? On that chromosome, but the homologous chromosome for mom will be the gene with the same thing on there, the stomach acid gene. They're homologous
Crazy.
because that gene is the same.
Hey, how old are you? She's laughing at herself.
Quiet. Yes, because we get two factors coming except 23. The sex chromosomes aren't, because if you're a guy, you don't actually have homologous chromosomes. You have an X, which has one set of genes on it. You have a Y that has a completely different one. So all humans have 22 pairs of homologous chromosomes. And then you have the sex chromosomes, which are not homologous, because the Y messes things up. Quiet. If you have a question, raise your hand. Chromosomes are homologous. They're homologous.
No.
Right? You get one from dad, one from mom. The only trait where you don't get one from dad, one from mom is gender, right? Only dad's gamete decides the gender. Mom always gives an X. Dad can give an X or a Y.
So would it be called
Homologous. So everything with a sex hormone, sex chromosome, are homologous chromosomes. Okay, so a diploid will have two of each chromosome and they're homologous, right? A haploid will get one of each pair of homologous chromosomes. So a haploid will not have the homologous chromosomes. It'll have one of each. It'll have maybe from dad you might get grandma's 1, grandpa's 2, grandpa's 3, grandma's 4, right? As we number these chromosomes along, you will get different individuals from the homologous chromosome pair. Okay, Sarah.
You might understand this, but did you say that the logos?
Homologous.
Yeah, did you say what the logos part means?
Okay, so logos means code, right? Right, it means words, right? So words can mean code or it can mean the names, right? So the homologous chromosomes have homo, the same, logos, the same words, the same genes. That's what homologous means, okay?
It's the same for like biology.
That's right, that's right. Logos means word or name. Okay, now, the way we split up these homologous chromosomes is through the procedure called meiosis. Now, who remembers what mitosis was? Well, that's right. So we took a diploid cell and made, nope,
Two more.
two
Makes the same thing.
diploids, because it makes the same thing, right? Mitosis took a diploid cell and made two diploids. Meiosis will be different than that. Once again, we'll start with a diploid cell, but this time we'll make what kind of cells?
Different.
Haploids.
Haploids.
That's right. Haploids are different than diploids. So, in meiosis, we take a diploid cell, one diploid cell, and we turn it into 4, and we'll see how it turns into 4 tomorrow. 4 haploid cells. One diploid cell becomes 4 haploid cells. Okay? Now, if haploid cells can't do as much as diploid cells, they have less DNA.
But I thought you said the sperm and the egg come together to make one, like they
Not
create
meiosis,
one.
though.
Oh,
Meiosis
this
is what
isn't the
makes
same thing
those
as that?
things. No, meiosis makes the sperm and the egg cells.
Gotcha.
The process of them come together is called fertilization. That's a different process. If you want to call it meiosis, you
I
can.
don't know the difference. Is meiosis the one we're talking about, or is mitosis and meiosis?
So there's meiosis and mitosis. Mitosis is one diploid making 2 diploids. That's copying, right? Meiosis is taking one diploid and making 4 gametes, 4 sex cells, not copies. Okay? So, why would we need to make gametes? Why do we need to make haploid cells when
We
they
need
are
babies.
less functional? That's right. To make what kind of babies?
Healthy.
Sure.
Duplicate.
Girl.
No, not to make duplicates.
To make
We don't
unique
need
babies.
new ones, right? To make unique offspring, to make new babies, we need haploids, right? If we want to make copies, we can just split, right? A bacteria can make an exact copy of bacteria by mitosis. You can make an exact copy of yourself by doing mitosis, then scraping off a cell and placing it into, well, theoretically, into a uterus, and it would grow a copy of you, right? That's how identical twins work, right? Except it doesn't happen after they're born. So, this can happen to form a clone. Now, we have, step down, so we have these actual gametes because we want to produce new offspring. And what's the process that produces new offspring?
Sexual reproduction.
Sexual reproduction, right? Sexual reproduction is the process that makes new offspring. What's good about that?
So you can evolve.
That's right. We have variety. We have diversity. And diverse populations are more resilient. I'll give you an example. We talk about bananas. If you have, let's say, 1,000 acres of bananas, you can sell those bananas and make a ton of money. But what happens when the banana flu strikes?
They all die.
What happens to your property and your money? It's lost. What if you have 1,000 acres of bananas and apples and pears and soybeans and cotton and all that stuff? What's going to happen if you catch the banana flu? That's right. Your loss is small. So, variation is the advantage of sexual reproduction. What's the disadvantage of sexual reproduction?
Wait,
It's not in a lot more.
there's an age, and humans there's an age in which you can't do it anymore.
Well, sure, but really the real problem between sexual versus asexual is it takes two for sexual reproduction, right?
It can't be ugly.
Or alone, right? Asexual reproduction can take place even if the organism is alone. If one bacteria lands on your hand, it can produce an entire realm of bacteria. But if one tiny bug lands on your hand and there are no more tiny bugs, there will be no more tiny bugs, right? So the problem with sexual, so I know you're not going to like this, but lice make more lice the same way all animals make more
Yeah,
animals.
I know, but are they
Lice has sticks on your head.
They already have
They mate on your head,
Ew!
and then they jump to other heads and lay those eggs.
Wait, so
They have sex in that head. Do other animals go through do other animals go through menopause like humans do? Or like mammals?
No, only some chimps. It's unique.
So
Human reproductive cycles are unique.
Other mammals can reproduce their entire life.
Oh, not necessarily. They just don't go through cycles, menstrual cycles. That's a uniquely human.
I thought dogs did.
No, they go into heat.
Which is
That's heat is different. Menstrual is monthly. That's what men's means.
Yeah, I know.
But dogs go through heat. No. Okay. So heat is not, and it's called estrus. Heat happens generally due to a number of factors like the amount of light. So it generally mimics seasons in a way that human menstruation, which is a unique phenomenon, doesn't. So when dogs go through estrus, they release a ton of eggs at once, right? Humans, on average, few exceptions like Octomom, release one egg a month. So that's very different from heat, which is when all the eggs are released. Right? Okay. But that's a little more into mammal reproduction than we're.
More babies. My dogs have more.
You were exactly right about that. Organisms that go through heat have larger litters.
Based on the.
They actually, I mean, not to get overly graphic here, people who raise livestock would actually take a intra-birth canal heat reading to tell if they heat up, they actually get hotter. If you ever known a couple who's trying to get pregnant, they will actually, the female right before ovulation has a slight fever. So you can take temperature readings to maximize fertility, as they call it. So if you've ever seen a movie, they do that whenever they're trying to get pregnant or.
What type of movies do you watch?
They do that all the time.
Okay, so we have these the sexual reproduction that actually produces new organisms, right? Downside is it requires sociability, right? It requires courtship. We'll talk about all these things. We get things like birds. So like all sexually reproductive animals have to have some sort of courtship behaviors. And so we'll talk about birds dance, they build houses, bugs will actually ride mates with food, buy dinner, it's the same thing. I don't know what you're talking about, but you're
high
being weirder and weirder today. So we have these kind of behaviors, which is what sexual reproduction requires, some sort of at least minor courtship. But that's a behavioral thing, we'll worry about that later. Now we're going to take a look at the different gametes produced because there are different processes. The sperm is the gamete produced by who?
Male.
The male, okay? And this is our definition. The sperm is always the small gametes, okay? The sperm is the small gamete. And that will give us our biological definition for male, which is the sex that produces the small gamete. Now,
Wow.
this is going to be a fairly strange definition, so you think of something like a seahorse. What do you know that's weird about
The
seahorses?
men give birth.
Pregnant.
The males actually do give birth, which would make us say, why don't you just call that one the female? But there's a reason. That's right. It's because the one in seahorses, the sex that gives birth also produces a small gamete, and in biology, the definition of male is the producer of the small gamete. Well, so it actually fertilizes, so the female actually gives eggs to the male as opposed to the male giving sperm to the female, which doesn't normally happen. So we have,
She
we
laid
have
down.
two. That's usually how internal fertilization works anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but
So we
What's
have,
it called? What's it called?
Where?
that's true, it just goes, it's just the female has the dude here, and the male has the, let's say, womb, right?
you don't know.
Okay. So we have these individual small cells, and generally, there's maybe one or two exceptions to this. Generally, the sperm cell will be the mobile cell. What does that mean?
It
when
goes
they-
from
can
one place
move.
to the other.
It can move. And what does it have to let it move, usually?
A tail, flagella.
A flagella. That's right. The
Got that.
sperm is generally the flagellated gamete, right? It's the one that's going to move. Which is why generally, aside from the seahorses, generally it's the sperm that travels to the egg, not vice versa. It's a little bit different in seahorses. They're one of the few exceptions. I actually don't know off the top of my head any other exceptions to this. That being said, even seahorses, it's the sperm that's flagellated, not the actual egg itself. Okay.
But why does the
Because
sperm
they're so much smaller, and sometimes they're a million times smaller than eggs, there can be many more sperm produced than there are eggs. In humans, in a lifetime, a female will probably release about 500 to 600 eggs. In a day, human male can produce 300 million sperm cells, right? It's a huge difference because they're so much smaller, that's right. Now, the egg cell, of course, is the gamete produced by the girl, or females. We rarely consider plants girls, but there are female plants. So the female, now, if the sperm is the small gamete, what must the egg be?
Large gamete.
The large gamete. Now, the sperm only contributes DNA. That means everything else comes from the egg. Cytoplasm, organelles, mitochondria, all of that's provided by the egg. If you remember, that's why your mitochondria is just like whose?
My mom.
Your
and my
mom's, going
grandma.
back to their mom, so on and so forth.
I tried to tell Erin that yesterday and she would not believe me. But she's failing biology in college so.
She probably failed this one too, for being real.
Well, she took it in Miss Middleton.
So we have the large cell, the egg cell, because it's larger, there's far fewer. In fact, that's our definition of female in biology class. The definition of female is the producer of the large gametes, okay? Just in biology class. That's our biological definitions of male and female.
Why does the sperm need a flagella in the seahorse if it doesn't move?
It actually does. It just moves from where it's created, the epididymis, to the actual area where the eggs are kept.
Gotcha.
Once again, it's easier. The smaller you are, the easier it is to move. So it's easy. One flagella can move a sperm. I don't know. It takes thousands to move the big cell to oval. Okay. So these are the two gametes, and because they're gametes, what does gam mean? Marriage or joined, right? Marriage or joined. Now, when these join together, when the sperm and the egg join together, we call the process fertilization. And fertilization results in a single diploid cell. We're going to call the single diploid cell a zygote. The single diploid cell is a zygote. The zygote is what's formed by the fertilization of the sperm and the egg. All sexually reproduced creatures began as zygotes. You were once one single cell that had the exact same DNA as all the rest of your cells did. And then what did that cell do?
To produce.
It divided. But what kind of division?
Mitosis.
Mitosis. And then it did mitosis again, and then you were 4, and then you were
8.
and then you were
16.
now up to your current, let's say maybe 900 billion cells,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Maybe a trillion. Kind of depends. So
What
about
does
a
it depend
trillion cells of you all came from that one single cell, the zygote.
Do you have more cells, or do you just have different cells? Like if I traveled to like Uganda, and I would get the cell, like they are different cells over there, right?
No. Every
None
one,
at all?
every
Like
one of
bacterial
your, every
cells?
one of your cells is what you made, right?
Yeah.
Are you talking about things that infect you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you get different bacteria.
So
When you
with-
meet somebody,
Are you more
if
likely
you
to
meet
have?
somebody and shake their hand and then pick your nose or rub your eyes, you just got some new bacteria cells in you. Interesting is, you've already got all your family and friends' bacteria in you, right? That kind of grows.
So wait, am I more my friend than I am myself?
No. Because you're still mostly your bacteria. Your primary bacteria sort of comes from your mom when you're born, right? You're covered in mom bacteria, and it tends to be. In fact, they're working on. I know this is weird. They're working on a genetic test that could tell based on your skin bacteria, your mom. Like you could actually identify your mother that way.
Oh.
Just by skin bacteria.
Aren't we already able to do maternal tests though, like DNA
Well, yeah, and
tests?
usually there's not a huge need for it, right? Because there's not a lot of confusion typically.
Unless you were thrown in a basket down the river like Moses.
True,
Yeah, or you were
there can be. It's not that it's necessary so much that it's interesting you can do that you can bacterial fingerprint somebody.
If someone's like taller or like bigger, does that mean their cells are bigger or they have more cells?
Usually both. Taller people generally have more cells, right? Overall, larger people generally have more, but also have larger. So you probably heard said that you don't get more fat cells; they just get bigger and smaller. But that's not true of things like your bones, right? They definitely put on more. Your tendons elongate a little differently. Things grow differently,
Because
basically.
like my mom said, like if you're like bigger bones, like you tell like I do this to your wrist or whatever, and like that's how like big your bones are. So does that mean like if you have like bigger wrists or whatever, you have your bones?
Well, yeah. So almost no one puts on fat at the wrist, right?
Yeah. So like does that mean that your bones have more cells or?
Well, so if you have larger bones, so if you have thicker wrists, you may actually have thicker bones, or at least thicker forearm bones,
So,
right?
Yeah, but like how does that relate to cells?
Right, so the bones themselves are actually going to have more cells, or rather, they're going to have more tissue between the cells, right? Because bones actually only slightly cells, and most of it's like rocks, basically. That's why it's so heavy and dense, because it's organic rock, basically. Okay, so the zygote is...
What?
That was me.
Oh, you know, good stuff. So the zygote is going to be that first diploid cell. It's caused by fertilization, okay? That's going to be the novel cell. That's going to be the cell that's never existed before until fertilization of the sperm. All right, we're going to stop there today. About a minute early. Yeah, we actually got a little bit farther than we did in the other class.
We are beating the other class
That's
so
what we
far.
had to say.
I gave you this.
Okay.
Oh, my sister did.